The Bridge to Belle Island, Chapter 16. What have we got caught up on? Let's see. Angst between Teddy and Isabel. What's he waiting for type thing. So that's kind of how we ended up with Chapter 15. In the morning, Benjamin and Mr. Hardy lingered over breakfast. When they saw Mrs. Philpotts and Miss Wilder leave the house with baskets of food and urns of tea for the weavers, they judged it safe to go down to the cellar unnoticed. Armed with candle lamps, they walked quietly below stairs. Following the dim passage, they heard the gentle splash of water and rhythmic clack-clack of crockery being stacked. A scullery maid washing breakfast dishes, no doubt. A pot clanged and Benjamin jumped, scuffing the floor. "Shh!" Mr. Hardy admonished. "Sorry." Mr. Hardy led the way to the cellar door and tried to open it. It would not yield. "You try." Benjamin tried the latch without success. It was locked. Footsteps tap-tapped down the stairs behind them, and Benjamin jerked alert. Feeling like a disloyal friend and misbehaving boy all at once, he held his breath as someone descended into the passage. He expected Miss Wilder, perhaps having forgotten something. Instead, Miss Lawrence appeared, drawing up short to find the two of them at the cellar door. Her eyes shifted from man to man. "What are you two doing skulking around down here?" Mr. Hardy said earnestly, "Forgive us, my dear, but Percival Norris was my friend, and I feel duty-bound to do all I can to bring his killer to justice." She arched one brow. "So you are sneaking down to the cellar to look for evidence that my aunt poisoned his wine?" "Or that someone did, yes." "Meaning me?" "You did carry a bottle into his office." "True." Rose hesitated, then gestured toward the door. "So, what are you waiting for?" "The door is locked. Is it usually?" Her brow furrowed. "I would not have guessed so. I have gone down there only once or twice, helping Aunt Belle move bottles from the still room. You might as well search there for now, for that is where she actually makes the wine." Rose led them to a small ancillary kitchen adjacent to the scullery, complete with stove, sink, and work table. "She and I dry flowers here and make our jams, cordials, and salves. Keeps us out of Mrs. Philpotts' way." Benjamin half-heartedly joined the search as Mr. Hardy looked in various cabinets and drawers, but they found nothing unusual. "Who keeps the key to the cellar?" he asked. "My aunt, I suppose. Or perhaps Mrs. Philpotts. I don't have one, if that's what you mean." Rose lifted her chin. "If I had poisoned the wine, I certainly wouldn't have done so in that nasty cobwebbed cellar. After all, I might have done it anywhere. Even waited until Uncle Percy's office was empty and poisoned it there." "What game is she playing?" Benjamin wondered, and shook his head. "I don't think so. If someone poisoned it in London, I'd wager the poison was introduced in the butler's pantry, where others would have ready access to that second bottle." She frowned. "Did that second bottle ever turn up?" He glanced at Mr. Hardy, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Benjamin said, "Yes, it has." Rose Lawrence clasped her hands and waited. Mr. Hardy said, "There has been a second poisoning by a bottle of Belle Island wine, which spurred our search down here today." "Good heavens, no!" Rose's fingers went to her throat. "Who?" "Mary Williams." Her eyebrows rose. "The housemaid?" "Yes." "But why would anyone want to—" She broke off mid-sentence, her wide eyes flashing to Benjamin's face. Was she recalling his conversation with Adair at dinner last night? He certainly was. Mr. Hardy added, "The bottle may have been meant for someone else. Your aunt sent only the 2 bottles to London. Is that right?" "Yes, 2," she murmured. After a moment she added, And you may as well know that Mr. Adair and I delivered the bottles to London for Aunt Belle." Benjamin tipped his head back. Why had she and her aunt neglected to mention that detail earlier? It was less condemning, he supposed, than the fact she had taken the bottle directly to Mr. Norris's office, but still questionable that Rose should conceal it, only to reveal it now, when her aunt was under suspicion. An hour later, Isabel Wilder sat slumped in the study, slowly shaking her head. Her niece sat beside her, holding her hand. Benjamin and Mr. Hardy stood like somber guards, both with their hands behind their backs. "I can't think how such a thing happened," Miss Wilder said. "That poor girl." "Were you acquainted with Mary Williams?" Again she shook her head. "I never met her." "Mary had only lately come into service with us," Miss Lawrence explained. Miss Wilder's voice rose in incredulity. "But why would anyone want to kill her?" "That's what we need to find out," said Mr. Hardy. "Though her death may have been accidental. Mr. Booker tells me the remaining bottles are still in the wine cellar?" "Yes, I filled them in the still room, then carried them down there to store. Rose helped me, as did Mr. Adair." She looked up at Benjamin, and he saw betrayal in her expression. "Rose told me she found you trying to sneak into the cellar. I told you I would show it to you any time you wanted." He looked down, shame heating his face. Mr. Hardy said, "We were surprised to find the door locked. Do you always keep it so?" "No, I locked it after Mr. Booker told us Percival had been poisoned. I thought it a wise precaution, just in case, to protect everyone." "Perhaps to protect yourself most of all?" Mr. Hardy asked, his tone matter-of-fact. "Have you something to hide down there?" Miss Wilder's mouth tightened, and her nostrils flared. She unclipped the chatelaine from her bodice and tossed her keys. Hard. Not at the man who asked the question, but at Benjamin. He deftly caught them, the metal keys stinging his palm, perhaps as she'd intended. "There! Happy hunting." She stalked from the room. Needing to calm down, Isabel walked out to the boathouse to be alone. For several minutes she continued her search for the missing earring, cut short by Mr. Booker's appearance the night before. Perhaps it was futile and foolish, but she just couldn't believe her own earring had ended up in London. Opening all the doors and windows wide, she searched every corner but found nothing. Nor had Lottie found anything in her thorough search of the bedchamber and dressing-room. Giving up, Isabel sat on the pier. Seeing no one about, she slipped off her shoes and stockings and let her feet dangle in the cool water. Completely perplexed, her mind whirled, searching for possible explanations for the earring, for the poisoned wine, for everything. Mr. Booker came walking along the shore a short while later. As he neared, she called, "Come to search for poison in the boathouse too?" He winced. "No, sorry about all that." "You made quick work of your search." Nearing, he explained, "Actually, we haven't gone down yet. We decided to wait until you were free to go with us, if you will." "I will, though I don't know what good it will do. I don't understand what's happened, let alone how." His gaze swept the boathouse behind her. "And what are you doing out here? Hiding from me, I suppose? Or searching for another earring?" "I've given up on that. Presently I am searching for peace by watching the ducks swim." Without waiting to be asked, he sat down beside her, near but not too close, crossing his legs like a boy. He asked, "Do you swim?" "Me? Goodness, no. Do you?" He shook his head. "Not since boyhood. I enjoy rowing, but no one wants to swim in the Thames near London. Filthy water." She nodded her understanding, suddenly aware of her own feet in the same river, which was fairly clean this far upstream. Isabel felt self-conscious about her bare feet and ankles in his presence, but thankfully between the long skirt and the water her skin was mostly covered. "Teddy swims, but I never learnt." "Most people don't." A memory struck her. "I shall tell you a secret, however." When we were girls, my sister and I went wading into the lagoon in only our shifts and stays. It was after a dry summer, so the water was only waist deep, but still we enjoyed splashing around. It's the closest I've come to swimming." She'd begun the story without thinking it through, and now her face heated to realize she'd mentioned undergarments to a man like Mr. Booker. Isabel stole a sideways glance at him. Were his cheeks red from embarrassment as well, or had he stayed too long in the sun? She swallowed and returned the conversation to safer ground. "Teddy's father insisted he learn to swim. Said anyone who lived near the river ought to know how, for his own safety." "Probably good advice." Mr. Booker narrowed his eyes in thought. "I believe Mr. Hardy can swim. As a youth he spent summers near a lake, if memory serves." Isabel studied his profile. In spite of her anger, she thought Mr. Booker remarkably handsome. She liked his full lower lip, strong cheekbones, and brown eyes, especially when they looked at her with admiration. "You speak of him a great deal," she observed. He looked at her, lips pursed. "Do I? I suppose I do. He has been my mentor for years now, taught me most of what I know about the law, almost a second father to me." "And he obviously thinks very highly of you," she added gently. "I gather he hoped for a match between you and his daughter?" Mr. Booker dipped his head, clearly embarrassed. "Yes, the objections were all on the lady's part, not his, and she was right to refuse me, no doubt. She has married a man far more gentlemanlike and accomplished than I am." "I am sorry." "Never mind." He shifted uneasily on the pier, then asked a question in return. "And Captain Curtis? I gathered he hoped for a match with you at one point?" "Mm-hmm." Percy objected, and truly I had reservations of my own, though I am fond of him. Curious, she returned to a former subject. "You mentioned Mr. Hardy is like a second father to you. Is your actual father still with us?" "Yes, in London. We don't get on." "I am sorry to hear it. Did something happen?" He shrugged. "We are quite different and have never seen eye to eye, a gap that only widened as I grew into adulthood. He and my brother are very much alike. Both medical men, confident and outspoken. Father wanted me to follow the family line, but I—" He hesitated, then said, "I was too bookish for them." "You? Bookish?" she said in faux surprise. "I had not noticed." She smiled as she said it, hoping he could take teasing as well as he dished it out. "Ha ha," he said with a crooked grin. "At all events, I had no interest in medicine." "Your father did not approve of the law for your vocation?" "No. He did not forbid me to be articled to Mr. Hardy, but he doesn't like it. Doesn't like Hardy either for some reason." "Perhaps he feels Mr. Hardy has replaced him in your affections, or taken his role in your life." "You think my father is jealous?" "Not likely. Probably relieved to shift responsibility to someone else so he could focus on my overachieving brother. Reuben has recently been appointed coroner." "Elected, you mean?" "No. Westminster appoints theirs. I doubt my curmudgeonly brother could win enough votes to become coroner otherwise. Even so, my father is very proud." "I'm sure he is proud of you, too." "Are you? I think not." "Forgive me. I didn't mean to pry or criticize. It's just, if my father were still alive, I would not let petty disagreements or misunderstandings stand between us." Mr. Booker stiffened beside her, his profile tight as he stared straight ahead, probably offended by her words. But at the moment Isabel was too swamped with emotion to pay much attention. Oh, how she missed her father. Tears filled her eyes and ran down her cheeks. Mr. Booker turned to her, face stern, and opened his mouth to deliver a sharp set-down, she guessed. But he took one look at her face and closed his mouth without a word. She swiped at wet cheeks with the back of her hand and managed a breezy tone. "And your mother?" Before her eyes his tense features softened. "A dear woman. I know it bothers her that my father and I are not close. You remind me that I should visit her when I return to London. Isabel nodded her approval, thinking, "Dear Mamma, I miss you too." Perspective changed. Benjamin's mother's face shimmered in his mind's eye. Plump cheeks, warm, intelligent eyes, a ready if slightly crooked smile. Benjamin missed her. His father, not so much. He'd been offended when Miss Wilder had challenged the rift with his papa. He'd turned to her, a rebuttal on his lips. Easy for you to say, to saint a father long dead. But then he saw her tears and stifled his retort, wishing he could comfort her instead. He could have told her his father was not proud of him, nor all that understanding about... Sorry. He could have told her his father was not proud of him, nor that all that understanding about his episodes, but instead he changed the subject. By the way, I paid a call on Dr. Grant yesterday. I went to thank him for his services and to see his office. Miss Medina mentioned finding it quite interesting. Disturbing, I think you mean, Isabel said wryly. I have never seen it, of course, but I did ask him about it. I tried tactfully to suggest he might store his specimens and experiments away from public viewing, but he did not take my hint, apparently. At least they are in his private office and not his waiting room. True. Miss Wilder chuckled and splashed her feet in the water. He'd been trying not to stare at that tantalizing glimpse of ankle and leg, but it was dashed difficult. Ooh, those ankles. He mentioned he'd spent time with his father recently, after keeping your company here in the boathouse. Are you acquainted with his father? Miss Wilder turned to stare at him, clearly stunned. Anger sparked in her wide eyes. He did not mention that to me. His father is not welcome here. She slapped her hands against the planks. Benjamin blinked. Why? He did not tell you? No. He said very little about him, except that he retired to the coast. Her small nostrils flared. His father was our coachman. He was driving the night my parents' carriage collided with the mail coach, and they both died. Now it was his turn to be stunned. Oh, Benjamin breathed, stomach sinking. No wonder you don't speak of him. She nodded. It is a sore subject. I have no doubt Mr. Grant is remorseful, and I know it was an accident. Carriage wrecks are far too common for me to doubt that. He was thrown clear and somehow escaped with only minor injuries. He felt terribly guilty and has never come back here before now, to my knowledge. Couldn't face me, I suppose. And I didn't want to see him either, or hear his apologies. Teddy told me he decided to retire, which was a relief, as I would have had to let him go, for we'd had little need for a coachman while my parents were alive, and far less after they were gone. Still, I am surprised Teddy didn't mention his father was here. I know he has visited him and his aunt a few times at Christmas or whatnot, but I didn't realize his father ever came to Riverton. Perhaps he didn't want to upset you further, so he didn't mention it. Very likely. Miss Wilder gathered her shoes in one hand and swung her feet to the pier. He quickly stood and offered her a hand. She hesitated only a moment, then put her hand in his. He helped her up, foolishly wishing he could keep holding on. Wishing she was innocent. Wishing they were not at cross purposes. She avoided his eyes. Well, almost time to deliver the midday meal, I think. She pulled her hand from his and stalked away, leaving a trail of wet footprints, and leaving Benjamin sorry he'd mentioned Mr. Grant when she'd seemed ready to forgive their trespassing. It was interesting, though. Benjamin sat back down, steepling his fingers as he considered. The proud and proper physician was a coachman's son. How unexpected. No wonder he tried so hard to seem respectable and uphold gentlemanly propriety, for he was no gentleman at all, at least by birth. Neither was Benjamin, of course, but he made no pretensions to being one. Or did he? Much to ponder. In his heart of hearts, he didn't think Isabel Wilder had poisoned anyone, at least not intentionally. And if somehow arsenic used as, say, rat poison had accidentally ended up in the bottles of wine, 2 people were still dead, but it would reduce the charge to manslaughter instead of premeditated murder. Deep down, he believed she was innocent of that as well. She did not seem like a woman who would make such a careless mistake. He sighed deeply, uncertainty and worry twisting his insides. His mother's face flashed into his mind again, gentle with that long-suffering smile she wore whenever she had to exhort him. He could almost hear her voice in his ear. "Benjamin, Benjamin, worry does no good. It saps your strength and joy. Instead, pray." Speaking to Miss Wilder about his parents reminded him of the unpleasant scene the morning of his departure for Belle Island. His father had stopped by his rooms as he was packing to leave. "Where are you bound?" "Berkshire. An assignment for Mr. Hardy." "Ah. Your mother suggested I call. We heard what happened in court yesterday, and I suppose you rejoice in my failure. After all, you always said it was a mistake to pursue the law." His father frowned and shook his head. "Do you know me so little? Or has that man prejudiced you against me so thoroughly?" "That man took me in and taught me everything he knows." His father opened his mouth, hesitated, and seemed to think the better of whatever he'd been about to say. Instead, he said, "I do not rejoice in your failure, as you call it. We have all made our mistakes. It's how we respond to them that shows our character. At our best, we learn from them, make recompense if possible, and behave better in the future. Not blame anyone else, or make excuses, or hide away in shame." "Is that what you think I am doing? Hiding?" His father cast a significant glance at his shabby valise. "You tell me." "Mr. Hardy thinks it wise that I absent myself from London for a time, but more importantly, I am looking into the death of his former partner." His father's brow rose. "I am sorry to hear of it. But that's a task for Bow Street, or your brother." My brother, yes, always my brother. "Reuben is handling the inquest, and an officer has been assigned, but he is focusing on local suspects. Mr. Hardy is not satisfied that justice will be done." "And he believes you are the man for the job?" "Mr. Hardy has confidence in me, even if you don't." "Ben, I know I have made mistakes too, especially where you are concerned. Mistakes I regret. I regret this distance between us, this enmity." "So do I. But is it not to be expected when you have made your disapproval of me evident for so many years? Thankfully, you have one ideal son in Reuben." His father slowly shook his head. "I care for you and your brother equally. Yet you must allow that Reuben was easier to raise, wasn't forever running off instead of helping or wearing on your mother's nerves as you seemed bent on doing. But we care for you both, and always will." He took a deep breath and added, "And yes, I was disappointed when you chose law over physic. I was angry and raised my voice more than I should have. I saw it as a rejection of me and my life's work." His father's eyes glittered with intensity. "Was it so wrong to want my sons to learn the profession beside me? To take over my practice and care for my patients one day? But now the shop is not smart enough for your brother either." "It's too late for me as well," Ben said. "I'm too old to change courses, to take the part of adolescent apprentice compounding medicines and pressing pills." "I know that. I have accepted your chosen profession. But would it kill you to spend a little less time with Hardy and a little more time with your mother and me? Even your brother wishes he could see you more often." That gave Benjamin pause. "Does he? He's never said." "It isn't his way. Booker men have never been good at expressing themselves or in showing emotion. But he cares for you and worries for you. We all do." "You need not worry about me. I am perfectly well." His father glanced at Benjamin's trembling hand. Are you sure you are equal to the journey? Had I known you planned to travel today, I would have brought ginger lozenges for your stomach. As I said, I am perfectly well. I'm an adult, remember, not the weak child you seem to think me. His father raised both hands. I don't. But does being a good parent mean never expressing concern? Never attempting to check our offspring when they are on a dangerous heading? If so, then I cannot be a good parent. Benjamin grimly replied, No, apparently not. He wished the words back as soon as they slipped from his mouth, regret washing over him. I didn't mean that. He ran a hand over his face. Look, I have no wish to fight with you. I am resigned to things as they are between us, but I will come and see Mamma when I return. Sitting there on the Belle Island pier, Benjamin held his head in his hands and prayed. He asked forgiveness for his harsh words to his father and his neglect of his mother. He prayed for wisdom and answers, and for the truth to set them all free. Then, wanting to expend some pent-up energy and remembering Miss Wilder's offer, Benjamin hung his coat in the boathouse, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and untied the rowboat. Young Joe came walking up the pier as he prepared to climb in. Going fishing, sir? Benjamin hesitated. He had not planned to fish, but the eager look in the adolescent's face could not be denied. I might, if I had a fishing partner. Joe's eyes brightened. Could I come along, sir? It has been a long time since I fished from a boat, but I still remember all the best spots if you don't mind some rowing. Ben grinned. I don't mind at all. After dinner that evening, Mr. Hardy went out to the veranda to smoke a cigar. Benjamin did not smoke, but he went out to keep him company. Across the Thames, the setting sun hovered over Riverton, gilding the clouds and rooftops. Crickets began to chirp, and twilight descended like a filmy gray curtain. As the two sat companionably, Abel Curtis walked past with a fowling piece and a black and white sheepdog, probably on his way back to the tenants' cottages. Hardy asked quietly, Who is that man? Mr. Curtis. Curtis? That name is familiar. Was that not the name of the young man who wanted to marry Miss Wilder years ago? Yes, that is his father. Evan Curtis became a captain in the infantry. Hardy nodded. That's right. He came to see Percival as her closest male relative shortly after her parents died. He refused his permission. On what grounds? On the grounds it would be a disastrous match. Curtis was only a shepherd's son. No prospects. Nothing to commend him. Percy sought my advice, and I agreed with him. But we did not send him away empty-handed. I have friends in the military. I suggested a commission in the infantry might keep him at a safe distance for a few years. How did Miss Wilder take it? Not well. She was angry with Percival for sending him away. I said he could tell her it was my idea, but he chose not to. Suddenly a dark figure stepped from the gloaming. Evan Curtis himself. Had he been purposefully eavesdropping? How much had he heard? Benjamin felt sheepish to be caught talking about the man, but Mr. Hardy seemed unaffected. Ben wished he had half his confidence. Mounting the veranda stairs, Curtis said, Well, that's one mystery solved. I wondered how Percy managed it. I should have guessed you were his right-hand man. Why did you do it? Hardy rose to face the young man. His tone was unruffled, even fatherly. Surely there was no mystery about our motive. Sad as it may seem, a shepherd's son does not marry an heiress. Groundsman, Evan corrected between clenched teeth. My father is groundsman on this estate. A long-time, trusted retainer. Ask Miss Wilder. Ask anyone. Hardy waved a dismissive hand. No need. I recall the particulars. The man slowly approached. Now I learn it was your idea to offer me a commission. Only trying to be helpful. Anger flashed over Curtis's face. You sent me as far away and to as dangerous a posting as you could manage. I don't know about dangerous, but distant, yes. Can you blame us? Miss Wilder was young and impressionable. We didn't want you to sway her to accept you against her family's wishes, or, heaven forbid, convince her to elope with you." Every muscle tensed, and Evan's hand fisted. Benjamin leapt to his feet just as the man lunged and grabbed hold of him. "Arrogant toff!" Curtis seethed. "Let me go! I want to punch that smug look from his face." Benjamin barely managed to hold him back. Curtis strained against his grip, glaring at Hardy. "How dare you? You knew nothing of me, nothing of Isabel or our plans. What gave you the right to decide I was unworthy of her, and worse, to send me away before I had a chance to prove myself?" "Come now, it was a good offer, you must admit. You could have declined, yet you did not." "Because I did not know the regiment was about to be sent to the war-ravaged peninsula. But you knew." Evan cursed and shook his head. "And all along I blamed Percy, when it was you who hatched the scheme. And there you stand, so dashed proud of yourself." Hardy shrugged. "My friend asked for my advice, and I gave it. There is no shame in that." Curtis's nostrils flared. When I returned to London, I paid old Percy a visit to express my grievances. He tried to pass the blame to you then, but I didn't believe him." "Did you kill the wrong man?" Hardy challenged. "I've killed no one, except in battle. So far." Benjamin looked from one to the other. Was Hardy onto something? Might Curtis be responsible for Percival's death? Ben asked, "Were you in London the night he died?" He jerked from Benjamin's hold. "Yes, I was, but I did not kill him." The captain's eyes glinted. "Although I have an idea who did." "Who do you mean?" Benjamin asked. "I couldn't say. Not to you two sons of prattlement." He straightened his lapels. "Good night, gentlemen, and I use that term loosely." He turned on his heels with military precision and stalked off into the night. Mr. Hardy stepped nearer and lowered his voice. "What do you think, Ben? Is he a possible suspect?" Benjamin hesitated. "I could certainly see him striking Percival in a passionate rage, but poisoning him with Belle Island wine? That seems less likely. Unless, does he resent Miss Wilder as well? If so, setting her up to take the blame would allow him to kill two birds with one stone, as it were." An interesting theory, Benjamin allowed. Was it true? Ooh, Evan Curtis knows something, but what does he know?